is all welcome. Mr. John, the Censored Citizen Niems.
God damn, what am I paying you for, man? John Niems here. Now let's get to it. Britain had no moral or legal authority to make pledges on Palestine back in 1917. It all started with the Balfour Declaration, which was simply a letter written by Arthur James Balfour, Britain's Foreign Secretary, to Walter Rothschild. And after World War II, the CIA was created with the National Security Act of 1947, and Israel and their Mossad officially created in 1948. From that moment on, Israel's Mossad and our CIA work hand in hand, creating wars by deception. And now we're going to hear a first song of mine, They're Running Scared. Would you looky here? The truth is causing fear to those who pull the strings, because they can't censor everything. A singer like me, who sings truth songs for free, has more impact than a gun, because they can't censor everyone. So now, somehow, we've got to get the upper hand. We sure need the upper hand, man. We need to work fast, please understand. Yes, now, somehow, we need to get the upper hand, because the truth is beautiful. Yes, the truth is beautiful, but to them, they're running scared. Yeah, they're running scared, all right. They're trying to censor everything right now. They're running scared. Those at the top, and we know who those are, trying hard to stop the people's great awakening, but they can't censor everything. A singer like me, who sings truth songs for free, has more impact than a gun. The truth is now hate speech, they can't censor everyone. So now, somehow, we've got to get the upper hand. You see, we need to work together, please understand. Yes, now, somehow, we will get the upper hand, because the truth is beautiful. Yeah, I love the truth. Yes, the truth is beautiful, but they don't. But to them, they're running scared. They're running scared. They're running scared. I can see them running, man. They're running scared. They're running scared. You're afraid of the truth. Don't stop getting it out.
June the 8th, 1967, the height of the Six-Day War. The USS Liberty, an American spy ship, had just been attacked by Israeli jets and torpedo boats while in international waters off Egypt.
The Israeli government and the U.S. Naval Attaché dropped a brown paper sack on the deck in the forepart of the ship, weighted down with an orange, had a business card in it. It landed right next to the severed leg of one of the deck personnel.
And the note said, "Do you have casualties?" Pretty obvious that there were casualties. I mean, there's still body parts and blood streaming down the bulkhead. So his message, "Do you have casualties?" was kind of out of place.
One of the sailors carried that sack back to the captain, and the captain took out the note and read it, looked up at the helicopter, and popped the social finger at him.
The big secret the Israelis wanted to protect was their next move. They had told the Americans that this was to be a limited war and not a land grab. But on June 8, 1967, their forces were poised to attack and seize the Golan Heights and invade Syria. Successive American administrations, both Republican and Democrat, had refused to deal with the Liberty. Even the issue of war crimes against unarmed Americans has never been addressed.
The hardest part was the reaction of our own government toward us. The fingers were pointed at us. The Israelis were never questioned as to why they did it. They only questioned us.
It took 13 years of haggling before both sides finally agreed a compensation deal for the ship. The bill plus interest was just over $17 million. Israel offered $6. The Americans accepted, then sold the Liberty for $100,000 scrap. Since the attack on the Liberty, the USA and Israel have grown ever closer. At the time, George Ball, the U.S. Undersecretary of State, noted that it seemed clear to the Israelis that, as American leaders did not have the courage to punish them for the blatant murder of American citizens, they would let them get away with anything.
Hey, welcome to the show. And finally, I have my good friend Dave Gahary here. And I hope you were paying attention to those sound bites on the USS Liberty. And by the way, it was $6. They offered $6 million. That's a funny number for them to offer, wouldn't you say, Dave? Welcome to the show. What? I'm not hearing Dave. Oh, man. I can't hear you, Dave. What's going on? Hold on a sec.
Can you hear me now?
No, yeah, now I can.
It was my fault. I always mute. And I said, great to see you, John. Great to be with you. And looking forward to talking about these crazy times that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, it's beyond crazy right now.
Yeah.
And what I said to you, that the $6, they offered $6. We go, 6 is always their number. It's amazing. Now, those sound bites that you heard was from another movie, and I'm sure if there's anything in that you want to clarify on that, because I look at you as my go-to guy for anything USS Liberty. Was anything incorrect in what they said in that?
No, it wasn't. The bag that was thrown down to the Liberty was weighted down with maybe 2 oranges, and inside was the business card of the attaché, Commander Ernest Castle, and he wrote on the back of that card, "Have you casualties?" Which, of course, I wasn't there, but I know what it looked like because there are photographs and because I interviewed about 30 survivors. And for somebody to ask, "Have you casualties?" when there's blood and body parts all over the deck of the ship, it kind of, I don't know what the guy would be thinking unless he didn't see, because he was in a helicopter and it was a while after the massacre. So I don't know. I mean, I can't really judge that particular fella on that day, but that's why the captain, I think, was so aggravated, because it was such a stupid question.
Right. And he probably thought it was mockery anyway, which is what they do a lot. And, I mean, how can someone ask a question like that? Now I will take my sunglasses off.
The future's so bright, you got to wear shades.
Yeah. But if we go back to your background and when you got started on the USS Liberty and working with Philip Turney? Is it Torney or Turney?
Turney.
Yeah, he's this book here is a book you can get. I highly recommend Holocaust on the High Seas. I handed out all my 20. I'm going to get 20 more from you soon to start handing them out. And then this other book, Erasing the Liberty, and we want to have your website up so people can get these. And you see behind me is my USS Liberty T-shirt, which everybody, you can order these from Dave, which helps him go along. But kind of give a background of how you got started with it, what you're doing, and that kind of thing to get people motivated to start talking about this and to start sharing this story, which has been kept hidden from the American people for over 50 years now.
That's right. Yeah, so I had interviewed Phil Turney prior to the month and year that he had contacted me to work on something, and that was in August of 2015, when we were moving from the beautiful Garden State of New Jersey down to the Sunshine State, and I was actually in a truck. I think it was a Penske truck crossing Pennsylvania. We were going out that way to get to 81, which is a much more pleasant ride than taking 95, where everybody goes.
Right. And
we were going through the mountains, and Phil called me, and he, wanted to do something. He didn't know what he wanted to do exactly. I didn't know, but anyway, that's how it got started. And I read the first book that came out by Phil and a fellow by the name of Mark Glenn, who's still active. Mark had written the book, and it's called What I Saw That Day.
Yeah.
And Mark actually worked at American Free Press before I did. And I worked at American Free Press, wrote for them, and did interviews for them for about 10 years until I resigned last November, because I just don't have the time to do that anymore. And so when Mark was there, he wrote this book, What I Saw That Day, and that's the book that I worked on to put together Erasing the Liberty. So Phil and I worked for hours and hours on this. I was trying to get as much information as I could, clarification from the book, and additional.
There's the book, Erasing the Liberty, right there.
Yes.
I handed out about 25 of these, too. I forget how many I handed out.
Yeah, you did. Maybe more.
Right.
That's the first version of it. So that one is 276 pages. And the second version is 434 pages. And there's another, I'll say hopefully, final version coming out, which is going to be quite different. Because from the time that I started this in August of 2015, so over 5 years now, and I had known about the Liberty prior to that, of course, but I have learned obviously a lot more, and it's a lot more nuanced, the story, than most people understand. And there's information that is just downright wrong, or it's incorrect.
Mm-hmm.
And there's information that's unknown. And of course, there'll probably be information that always will remain unknown, unless someone decides to talk about it. I'm going to turn off this fan. It might be making a little noise. And the first book came out, the one that you have, the 276-page book. And then after that came out, there were people who came forward and wanted to tell their story. So give their what I refer to and what other people refer to as an oral history.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that and because of other information, the book increased from 276 pages to 434. And after that book came out, then more people came forward, and I dug more and found out some more stuff. And so this, as I said, this last version is hopefully going to be the last. I mean, I'll say hopefully. The only reason I wouldn't say hopefully is because if some, vital information was released, by people who were actually involved in the operation. So not even, for example, the lead pilot who attacked the Liberty, who I've communicated with. He's gone on the record as saying that, there was no conspiracy. He was just following orders, and he didn't know it was an American ship. Now, the way that someone could interpret that is that, well, how could you not know it was an American ship?
Right.
And it was a perfect sunny day, just the right amount of wind to lift up the flag. Nothing. I mean, just beautiful. The water was like glass. But then you have to think about these jets that are traveling, obviously, pretty fast and pretty high. And is there a possibility that they didn't know it was an American ship? Is there also a possibility that they might have thought it was an Egyptian ship disguised as an American ship
with the false flag? That's the old
right.
All wars in the past were that's where the false flag comes from. You raise
exactly.
the enemy's flag.
That's right, exactly. Or could it have been a Soviet ship? So, this particular fella, I don't know because I wasn't there, but he's telling me, and he's told other people that he did not know. And what I'm referring to are the people who actually instigated the operation, who said, there's a U.S. Navy ship there, go attack it, without telling them it's a U.S. Navy ship. So what we do know is that Israel knew that the Liberty was there, for sure. They knew it was the Liberty. And the night before, they even told the representative in Israel, the U.S. representative in Israel, to get the Liberty away from the coastline or they were going to attack it. So this information was released in a Senate subcommittee or a congressional subcommittee hearing. One of the people who was on that committee was my representative now. He's passed on now, but I'm in Florida District 1. My congressman is Matt Gaetz, the fellow who was in the 1st District at that time in 67 was Bob Sykes. And he's a pretty respected guy around here in the Florida Panhandle. A lot of highways and libraries and roads named after him and airports. I mean, it's all over the place. So I believe that they did know it was, for sure, they knew it was the Liberty. And I believe that they attacked it on purpose. I don't know if the actual men who did the attacking knew for sure, because, again, you're dealing in a wartime situation, and the atmosphere was very tense leading up to the war, where Israel preemptively struck Egypt. At that time, it was called the United Arab Republic. The Arab countries had, more than at any other time, they had come together to condemn Israel. So we're talking about Egypt, UAR, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, even Saudi Arabia. So these countries all had a vested interest in vilifying Israel, the Zionist entity, and they wanted to really rub them out, just destroy them, get them.
One question I had, wasn't the Israeli attack on Egypt a surprise attack too? That came out of nowhere, pretty much.
That's right.
So
yes.
So they pretty much started the 6-Day War then, wouldn't you say? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And yet, that's another thing about Israel. They always don't want to say that it wasn't their fault to start it. It was always somebody else's fault to start it.
Yes, that's right. The backdrop to it is very important, and that's what most people who want to honor the Liberty story and the Liberty guys, and of course all the people associated with the Liberty, the wives who went through hell, not knowing that if their husbands were alive for weeks. So all of the people involved in the Liberty story, very few of them pay attention to the geopolitical history of the time. And what was happening then was that, well, this was really like an extension of the previous two wars. So we call it the 6-Day War. Israel calls it the Third Arab-Israeli War. So the 1948 war, when they got their independence, the 1956 war, which was the Suez Crisis, where the UK and France and Israel all conspired to go after the Suez Canal, and the same fellow was there at the time, Gamal Abdel Nasser. And then, of course, this 67 war was the third war. So there was a United Nations force in Sinai, and it ended up that they were in Egypt. There was the possibility they could have been in Israel as well, but Israel didn't want them in there, which is understandable. But Egypt accepted them, and they were there to make sure that, hostilities would not occur. Well, Nasser, the president of Egypt, pretty much told them to leave, and they did because they had to. They didn't really have any authority there. Mm-hmm. And he closed the Straits of Tiran. So if you look at a map and you put in Straits of Tiran and you look at that particular map, you'll see that waterway was the only way from the south that Israel could allow ships to get to its port of Eilat. And so it wasn't just closing the straits, but it was more than that. It was psychological. So a lot of this stuff, this political maneuverings and saber rattling is just as important as a hot war. So Israel was concerned that if Nasser was allowed to get away with closing the straits without any consequences, then he would be emboldened, and then it would really put them back on their heels. So they were shuttling back and forth between countries like the United States, and I'm talking about Israel was, right, the United Kingdom, France, to try to convince, no, it's not an ally because they don't have any allies, but prior to what Trump did, those agreements, but just recently, but to try to convince them, hey, we need your help because we're not just dealing with Nasser in Egypt, who closed the straits and he's making us look stupid, and Syria and Jordan, and of course King Hussein was basically a CIA stooge, but he still had to pay lip service to the Arab street, as they called it, right, because You had the Palestinian issue, and you had all of these leaders, the monarchs and the presidents and the new Ba'ath Party in Syria, who, they needed to be united to all get together to destroy the Zionist scourge. This is what they were saying, and this is, how they were publicizing it, and the cartoons and, the posters and the radio broadcasts. So Israel was really feeling the heat of the hatred all around them. And the citizens in Israel were, digging trenches and bomb shelters. I mean, they didn't know what was going to happen. So it was a very tense situation. It wasn't just because of the Arab countries and the threats that they made, but it was also primarily because of the whole superpower United States, Soviet Union rivalry.
Right.
So the Soviet Union had, made its force felt there in the Eastern Mediterranean. They sent I think they had like about 70 vessels in there. They moved them in, besides surface ships, submarines. And, they didn't want, obviously, the power balance to change there. So you had a situation where Israel was damned if they did and damned if they didn't. And going to the United States to get some kind of assurance from Johnson, they were unsuccessful.
And now, a few questions I have. One is, what's the term blood libel? Is that what it is, Sashas? Is that something that rings a bell with you, with the USS Liberty?
Yeah, not yet though.
Not yet.
But later on.
Okay, before we go to that, then the other thing is I wanted to ask, like John McCain's dad wasn't he the original commander of the USS Liberty, and he was pulled from it before. Yeah,
I'll tell you that. I'll get to that point.
Okay, and then I had another question
yes?
in my head before I'll let you go. By the way, as you're explaining all this, I think back to when I was 15 at this time and all my life. You're telling me more than anybody ever, right, at this moment. And it's just another story that, for whatever reason, they don't want the American people to know, and they never want you to know the whole story. And it's just amazing to me how, when you start to do research, you come up with so much that they're always trying to hide. And right after the attack, too, they, as I recall, too, they cleaned up the ship before they brought it back to make it look like it wasn't that bad of an attack, correct?
That's right. Yeah, and I don't know why it is that, this story hasn't been told in this fashion. I don't know, but I mean, these are the facts. Israel, in this case, definitely was the bad guy. But there are mitigating circumstances surrounding the story. There's no excuse for attacking the Liberty. There was really no need to do it.
Yeah, because it didn't have really weaponry on it. It was an intelligence ship, and it was pretty obvious it was a neutral kind of ship. It wasn't going to attack anybody, right? They could tell.
Well, yeah, it wasn't a warship.
Right. That's what I mean.
But the reason that the Liberty, now we're talking here, the war starts in June, okay, June 5 at about 7:45 in the morning. And prior to that, the closing of the Straits of Tehran, I think that was May 22nd that he did it. The Liberty, the USS Liberty, was moved away from its station on the west coast of Africa on the 24th, I believe. So when the Straits of Tehran were closed, that was kind of like a, Caesar crossing the Rubicon type moment where, they knew that something, the people in the area knew that there were going to be hostilities.
Right.
And so the Liberty was moved from the Ivory Coast on the west coast of Africa, told to report to Rhodes, Spain, to drop off some crew members and pick up some new crew members, and to pick up supplies. And so they had popped into Rhodes. I think they left on June 2nd, and they didn't arrive on their station in the Eastern Mediterranean, and this is another thing that most people don't realize, until June 8th at about 2 in the morning local time.
Right.
So, and they were, of course, attacked 12 hours later. So they were only there for 12 hours.
And the weather got real nice that day, too. It was kind of bad before that, and then it cleared up. So they thought it was like a sunny day. We can get some sun and relax. And that was the thing to me that made the whole event worse, because you go from living it up kind of, hey, this is kind of nice, we're on a ship, not worried about anything, and you see Israeli planes above you, and you don't think, hey, there's nothing going to happen here. They're our friends. And then in a moment notice, it became it went to hell, right? From beautiful heaven and to hell in a matter of seconds.
Yeah, they were actually that day. They were actually some of them were actually suntanning,
right,
on the deck. So, which is pretty cool. I don't know. I was in the Navy, but I was on submarines, so we couldn't suntan on the deck, of course. But so the life on a ship is a lot different than the life on a sub, of course. And that's another reason why I got involved with this. Being a Navy guy, I was interested in it.
Uh-huh.
So, the Liberty gets there, and, no other ships are in the Eastern Med except for some Russian ships, which they noticed when they were coming down to their station. And they were in international waters, and their mission was, now remember, I've interviewed a lot of Liberty survivors, from the lowest to the highest living, and their mission was to find out. You think you're a spy ship, right? You're the most sophisticated spy ship in the arsenal of the U.S. Navy.
Yeah, and
you're working for the National Security Agency, and you think you're going to get some, like a teletype. This is your mission, right?
Right.
Even like a Mission Impossible.
Right.
Right. Like, you remember Jim Phelps, right?
Yeah.
Your mission, Jim. Should you decide to accept, right? I mean, the Liberty was told to find out who's doing what to whom. That's it.
In the 6-Day War. That's all they were.
6-Day War. So the 6-Day War started on June 5 in the morning. The whole day. The war. See, and this is one of the most important parts of the whole story here. The war was basically over that day.
Even by day 3.
Yeah, even before that. Yeah, by June 7, it was completely done.
Uh-huh.
So the theory that the speculation that, it's not even a theory, that Israel wanted to attack the Liberty and sink it and blame it on Egypt, so the United States would enter the war on Israel's side.
So that's not
doesn't
true.
make any sense.
Yeah.
What's that?
So that doesn't make sense. But then why? The question is, would they do so much damage? Is the question. I mean, they obviously were trying. It looked like they were trying to sink it with all the blood and guts and all the damage to the ship. So that's the question. Why was it such a horrendous attack?
Yeah. So that's the question. And of course, that question's important on one hand, but on the other hand, it's not important. And some of the reasons why they might have attacked it. Now, the planes, if the planes, for example, wanted to sink the Liberty, they could have just used one heavy bomb on it and sunk it, and that would have been it. It was just a cargo. It was a converted cargo ship. It wasn't a warship. It would have gone down like a rock. So they didn't. But what they did, what the planes actually did was they took out all of the communications antennae, all 45 of them. There were 45, but supposedly one was down for repairs, so they couldn't get that one because they couldn't latch onto it with their heat-seeking missiles. So let's say that they took 44 of them out, so they couldn't transmit any messages. They were jamming their frequencies, their tactical and distress frequencies. So they didn't want them getting out any messages. That's for certain. Every Liberty survivor says the planes were unmarked. Again, I wasn't there, I don't know, but it's possible that because of the speed of the planes, they couldn't see any markings.
Well, weren't the first planes, though, they saw before the attack, though, were clearly Israelis, though, right?
Yeah, those planes were surveillance planes.
Okay.
So the Liberty was surveilled from about 6 in the morning till about noon. So for 6 hours. And yes, the sailors, most of the sailors who saw it knew that obviously they were Israelis. They could see the Star of David on the planes, and they could see the pilots. They were that close. They were actually waving to them. So they felt, as you explained, they felt safe that their friends were there. They were going to protect us,
right,
from the dirty Arabs. And after about 2 hours after was when the attack began with the jets, and that is the fellow who I've communicated with, the lead pilot of these Mirage jets. And then after they expended their ammunition, then some Mystere jets came in. So the Mirage were attack jets, and the Mysteres were fighter bombers. And so they came in and they dropped napalm, and they fired, cannon and rockets. They expended their ammunition. They murdered 9 Americans. And then a short time after that, maybe 10 minutes or less, and I don't have the exact time in front of me, I should know it, the motor torpedo boats approached the Liberty in attack formation with the lead boat flying the Star of David. So it wasn't disguising the fact that it was Israeli. So they were coming there to attack this ship that they were told was shelling the shore. So what happened at the same time was in this city called El Arish, there was some ammunition baking off, and this is their story. Again, I don't know. I can't verify it. I can't, say that it's true or not true. But the story is that the baking of the ammunition made the leadership of the Israeli armed forces believe that ship, that the Liberty, was shelling the shore. So they didn't know if, is this now a counterattack made by Egypt? Now they're going to come ashore. Because they were so successful in taking out the Egyptian Air Force and even the Egyptian army, but they weren't sure if, they had other plans here that were in the works. So there's a possibility that could have been true. I don't know again, but the motor, did you want to ask something, John, before I go to the motor torpedo boats?
I want to, maybe this would be a good time to play my song, and then we'll go back to there. We're gonna play June 8th, 1967 now, and before I play it, I want people to know that I wrote this for Dave and all the work he's doing, and I have a video on it on my YouTube channel, and surprisingly, it hasn't been taken down. It's one of the few of my videos that hasn't been taken down. But that is surprising. Yeah, we're gonna play June 8th, 1967 for you right now, folks.
June 8th, 1967, a day we all should know. Our Navy ship, the USS Liberty, was sailing to and fro. The sun was shining, the waters were calm. Israeli planes were overhead. Then shock and war as hell came raining down. Torpedoes from below, then 34 would be dead.
174 wounded.
And nothing was ever done, no. No, nothing was ever done. The cover-up had begun, yeah. It's so hard to fathom that from day one nothing was done. Nothing was done. There was no mistake in the ship's identity. The intent was clear, to sink her.
5,000 shells hit the ship.
Over 50 years, and they're still trying to hide it. Makes you wonder who's in charge here. So something must be done now. Yes, something must be done. Time to get up, everyone, now. Start telling the truth
About Israel.
Do you know, from day one, they've never been friends to anyone. June 8th, 1967.
Yeah, every time I hear my song, it's one of my most proud songs, by the way.
I love that song.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful song. And I guess the song is kind of like the whole matter of the USS Liberty. It's unknown.
Right.
You know, it's such a great song. It should be known, but it's not. And, you know, the reason it's not is because of the incredible power that the Jews media has. And so if you, well, let me finish the story here. Or
right.
of course,
yeah. Then the subs you were going into now.
The what now?
The submarines or the torpedoes? Is that what was going on next?
Yeah, well, the motor torpedo boats. So the motor torpedo boats approached the Liberty, and the story goes that because, as we mentioned before, it wasn't a warship, and the only armaments that were on board were four 50 caliber M2 Brownings in gun tubs, so round metal gun tubs, which you've seen the pictures of. And, you know, that was just to repel boarders, you know, like the Somali pirates or something like that. It wasn't to fight off jets or motor torpedo boats. The story goes that some of the ammunition in one of the gun tubs was baking off, or one of the sailors manned the gun tub and shot a couple of rounds at the motor torpedo boats before the captain could stop him, and that then gave the motor torpedo boats the go-ahead to launch their attack. Well, they besides having 50 calibers on board the motor torpedo boats, And at this time, there were no, well, at least in this matter, in the Liberty matter, there was no, save the napalm, there was no American weaponry and armaments. And the reason was because the United States wasn't supplying Israel with any weapons. They did indirectly via Germany supply them with some Patton tanks, but nothing here, nothing, of course, like to the extent of now. Nowhere near that. So this was all French weaponry. The motor torpedo boats were wood-hulled Mulin torpedo boats. The Mirage and Mysteers were French jets. The Surveillance, the Nord Atlases were French. So pretty much everything was French. And so the torpedoes that were on board the motor torpedo boats, however, were German. And they were, those seaplanes, you've seen those seaplanes that drop torpedoes in the water from the plane.
Yeah.
So these were modified German seaplane torpedoes. And the history of them was such that they were failures as torpedoes. And the only time that any of these torpedoes that they had hit a target was when one of the Israeli ships launched one and it actually turned around and hit the Israeli ship. Oh. So these were not very good torpedoes. They never could get it right.
That sounds like McHale's Navy right there.
Exactly. So each one had 2 torpedoes. Each one of these 42-foot wood-hulled Mulin torpedo boats had 2 torpedoes. And torpedoes are huge. People don't realize it. And I didn't realize it until I was in a submarine. And actually, I was, in the back part of the sub, the stern, and that's where we had, torpedoes were held back there as well. And they're monstrous. I mean, they are like, huge. I mean, big, maybe, 4-5 feet across and long. So they launched 5 torpedoes at the Liberty, and actually one amazingly hit. And the one that hit, it fortunately hit in such a place that it didn't cause the Liberty to sink. It did, however, murder 25 Americans, probably instantly. So in between the attack by the planes and the attack by the motor torpedo boats, the Liberty was getting off SOSs. And the SOS was received, fortunately, and that's all in the book that people can read about it, how that was actually done. And planes were launched from 2 of the aircraft carriers that were off the coast of Crete, because the U.S. 6th Fleet was in the Eastern Med at the time, but because the United States was being accused by Egypt of helping Israel, the 6th Fleet was moved out of the Eastern Med. So they didn't want to, give the Arab countries, which at that time, now the United States is completely Zionized, right?
Exactly. Like so many countries, Australia and Canada and all the...
Right,
exactly. During the COVID, the worst countries are the Zionists most.
Exactly. They're all Zionized now, but back then, and before that, there were a lot of what were called Arabists in the State Department and the government and the CIA. They didn't want to, even at this time in '67, they didn't want to make it appear as if the United States was favoring either side, even though at the time the Johnson administration was surrounded by Zionist Jews in his cabinet and the people who funded his campaign. They were all the biggest top Jews, because Jews love Democrats,
yes.
Even now.
You noticed?
Yeah. So even though they had that power over politicians and Johnson and the media, they still didn't have the control over the government bureaucracy who wanted to present an even-handed, balanced approach to the Middle East, which actually was done at the time. So there wasn't like, oh, Israel's the greatest, let them do whatever. There was none of that at that time. Remember, no weapons, no real support.
But didn't planes, weren't they called back too before they could go help the ship?
Well, that's right. So at the time that the massacre happened, the Carrier Task Force 60, which was the USS America and the USS Saratoga and the various other vessels within that battle group, they were conducting war games. Does that sound familiar?
Yes. And
the planes, a lot of the planes were equipped with nuclear weapons at the time. So they had to take the weapons off before they could launch rescues, a rescue mission. So that took time, because there's the people who believe that if the planes weren't called back, then they could have stopped the torpedo attack. It would have been impossible for that to happen, because the torpedo attack was at about 2:35. The jet attack started at 2. The SOS got off relatively soon, but by the time they launched the planes, and all anyone has to do is look at the time, you could see that it had already happened. They couldn't have gotten there. It's impossible. Even if they had F-16s that could do, 1,300 miles an hour. Not F-16, sorry, F-4 Phantoms. So the planes were called back. The first sortie that was launched from the USS Saratoga was called back by Secretary of Defense McNamara. And at the time, the admirals on board the flagship, which was the USS Little Rock, which was the ship in charge of that battle group, they thought that, well, maybe somebody in Washington thought that, because we were having a war game, that there were nuclear missiles, let's launch them again. So they were launched again, and it was called back by McNamara. And at that time, the admiral aboard, who was actually on board the America, Admiral Lawrence Geiss, he said, that he wanted confirmation from a higher source, from McNamara, who was the Secretary of Defense. Right. And the only higher confirmation was the president. So the president got on, and I have this corroborated from 2 different sources. And what he said was, he didn't say, I want that ship at the bottom of the goddamn sea, which is what a lot of people...
I was going to ask you that, but I thought that was not correct.
Yeah, it's not correct. People, they still spread it. Even the people on the Liberty do. And it's just not accurate. And what he did say was, get those planes back, or you're going to be pushing pencils. I'm not going to embarrass an ally over a few dead sailors.
Well, that's pretty bad too, right there.
That's horrible. Of course. But put it in perspective of what was happening with Vietnam and the body bags and all the deaths. And on top of it, really, I think the most important factor impinging on Johnson's decision was the Soviet Union. So the first use of the hotline ever, which was installed after the Cuban Missile Crisis, was during this 6-day war.
During the USS Liberty thing then too. Okay.
No, it was before that. It was on the 5th.
Okay.
So it was used something like, I think, almost 20 times during this war, this crisis. And the United States was afraid that the Soviet Union might then, think that they were launching the planes to assist Israel. And they didn't want that balance of power disrupted. So there is some, and I don't know for sure yet, but there is some word or information I've been given that the Soviets had threatened Johnson that if they didn't get the planes back, they were going to shoot him out of the air. I have to verify that, but I could tell you that it was a very tense time in that area. We were close to, of course, the United States and the Soviet Union perhaps getting involved in a hot war. The Soviet Union was ready to drop troops in between Damascus and Tel Aviv because Israel had not yet gone to the Golan Heights yet. The Liberty was there. They were in the way. They had grabbed the Sinai, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank of the Jordan River, Jerusalem, which they failed to get in 1956. And they were on their way to the Golan Heights. And because Syria was another client state of the Soviet Union, they were afraid that Israel might just continue all the way to Damascus. And they didn't want that to happen. So it was a tense time.
I have another question about napalm. Was that used in this time too?
Yes, that's what I said before. Yeah, the only U.S. weaponry that was used here was the napalm. And I don't think they got it from the U.S., but they did have it nonetheless. And it was used not on the personnel, but it was used to degrade the electronic equipment.
Okay, and there's all that talk that JFK was going to not send any weapons to Israel before his assassination, but that they had not started sending them stuff, apparently, what you're telling me then.
Well, actually, JFK was the first president to ever give Israel any weapons because he understood the electoral value of appeasing American Jews.
Right.
By doing that. And the only weapons he gave were defensive missile batteries.
Okay, so they didn't have much there at that time. That's what you're saying. By 1967, they still didn't have much.
They had nothing. They had nothing.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well,
the U.S. was not pro-Israel.
And
like it is today. I mean, today it might as well.
Right.
Might as well be Israel.
Yeah, and I want to mention to people too. Again. What is the site? You have the Holocaust on the High Seas. That's the website, right? You can order that book?
Well, the best site to go to is erasingtheliberty.com.
Okay, erasingtheliberty.com. You can buy a T-shirt like the one I have behind me.
Yes.
And you can buy this book, Holocaust on the High Seas. And you can buy this other one, Erasing the Liberty, too, right?
Yes. So the Holocaust on the High Seas, I put that together for Phil. What that is that's an abbreviated and amended version of that book I mentioned before, which was What I Saw That Day. So this is just pure liberty from his eyes, what happened. And it's concise, as you know, easy to read. And it gives the story of what he saw that day. Erasing the Liberty is a much more thorough, as far as from the eyes of other people, much more comprehensive. It looks at other matters. And of course, the T-shirt, as you have in the background, is it's a nice T-shirt. It is a Hanes Beefy Tee, high quality T-shirt. And I believe it's pre-shrunk. And every T-shirt will shrink a little bit. But it's got a design on it, as you show. That was designed by
the back of the shirt right there.
Yeah, myself and David Dees, who sadly passed on in the spring.
Oh.
So David Dees did that. He had done a design like that with blood streaming down the ship and other things that I asked him to change because there was blood streaming down the ship in the inside of the ship, the superstructure, but not over the bow or anything like that.
Well, talk about John McCain's dad, though, and
yes. So John McCain, he was not on the Liberty. He was the commander-in-chief of U.S. Naval Forces Europe.
Okay.
So, yeah, John McCain's part in the Liberty is that, well, when the Liberty was moved from Africa, it was moved under the power of the Pentagon, so the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and of course they have to get their people like McCain, Commander-in-Chief, Naval Forces Europe, to actually do it.
And remember, folks, he's not talking about the John McCain you see in all these. This is his father that he's talking about here.
The father, Admiral McCain. Yes, that's right. And they come from a long line of Navy guys. I think then his father was aboard the USS Arizona. I think he was the first high-ranking official Navy officer to be killed by the Japanese.
Okay.
So after it went to Rota, Spain, and then there's still a Navy base there in Rota, Spain, and then went to the Eastern Med, it was the command was handed over from the Joint Chiefs of Staff to the NSA, to the National Security Agency, because it was their ship, right? Mm-hmm. So it wasn't a pure Navy ship, right? And there were other spy ships at the time, like the Jose Valdez, that was manned by merchant marine, by civilians, not sailors.
Right.
So the Liberty was a crew of about 300, and about 100 of them were the sailors who made the ship run through the water, and the other 200 were the spies. So that was the contingent of communications technicians whose mission it was to capture communication signals. So what McCain's role was that after the massacre and the Liberty limped from its station to Malta, the dry docks in Malta, because the ones in Crete couldn't accommodate what had to be done, which, as you mentioned, they put lipstick on a pig, right? They patched it up so it didn't look like, there was anything wrong when it came back home to the United States. It was McCain who was instructed to commence the Naval Court of Inquiry to do the investigation. Now, the Naval Court of Inquiry wasn't done to find out who was responsible for the attack. And that's another thing that most people don't realize. But it was done simply to see if the Navy personnel aboard the Liberty had done their jobs correctly. So McCain ordered it done rather quickly, where typically an investigation of this sort would have taken at least 6 months. He ordered it done in a week.
Yeah, so they did.
So that was McCain's part in the cover-up.
Nothing to see here. Let's move on. And
exactly. And of course, there are a lot of reasons why the Liberty was, and I'm not talking about now, but back then was brushed under the rug. The main reason was that the Liberty was a spy ship, and there were several other of these ships around the world on different ports that looked exactly the same. And of course, the press wanted to know, what was this ship doing there? What did it do?
Right.
And there were other countries who would have seen these same type of ships. And wait a second, that's the spy ship that was attacked by Israel. What is it doing here? So basically, what the attack did was it blew the cover of these ships. And so Johnson just wanted to brush it under the rug. On top of it, the American Jews, via Israel, were applying pressure to him and his administration. So it was kind of like he had egg on his face because of what happened with the Liberty. It was an embarrassment. He just wanted to bury it. He didn't want it to get out anymore. They were hoping, some people are actually hoping that it would sink on its way from the Eastern Med to Malta. This way it would just be done, gone. It was just a damn embarrassment that it happened.
Right.
One other thing that's important that people don't realize is that because Israel was so successful in its attacks against Egypt and Syria and Jordan, that in the Egypt front, they were able to grab a lot of Egyptian war material, which was Soviet. So this was the same kind of weaponry that was being used against the Americans in Vietnam. So they made a deal with the Americans that they would give them this weaponry if they buried the Liberty story.
Oh man! Well, you're opening my eyes to a lot more of what I've heard on this. And are you still? We have been working on a movie. How's that going? And trying to get that out.
Yeah, well, we did. What happened was that on the second revision of the book, we created a script, a screenplay, which is, of course, the first step in any movie. And that was the first draft. And then, of course, what happened with, as I explained, with all the other information coming up, as soon as the next revision is done of the book, then we'll have another draft of the script with this new information incorporated in there. And then I'll be able to, now that I don't know, this year I just actually got my passport. I haven't had it for like over 30 years, to start traveling because of the movie. And with this virus scam, with this scamdemic, I don't know what's going to happen. But as soon as things clear up, then yes, the movie's going forward.
Well, that's great news here.
Yes.
And so, people, I want to say that Dave is one of my heroes. He works tirelessly on this. This is a guy that everybody should get behind. Now we met about 2016, I think, or 17, around that.
Maybe 16.
Yeah, or
maybe 4 years ago.
I think it was 2015, because you had done that interview with Victor Thorne that I love so much.
Yeah,
and but Dave and I have become fast friends. And again, what's the main Race to Liberty? You can find the books and the T-shirts, and by contributing, that helps Dave and all the work he's doing right now, folks. And I wanted to break up a little now. We're going to play my CIA song, When in Doubt, They'll Take You Out. And the reason I wanted to play that today, because like I told in the intro, the CIA was created the same time Israel was created. So if you think the Mossad and the CIA don't work together, I got news for you. So here's When in Doubt, They'll Take You Out. Dave, you can have a little break right now.
When in doubt, they'll take you out. That's their M.O. and most use remedy. They're high-paid thugs making billions on illegal drugs under the guise for yours and my national security. The CIA, they collect their pay to start their dirty wars. That's all that they're good for, the CIA. They really do make you feel good. The CIA. Plausible deniability are their two favorite words. And when their crimes are exposed, their denials are simply absurd. Why, oh why, are they given so much free rein? Since 1947, they only create fear and pain. In the CIA, where killing is okay, they love to assassinate. Too many have had that fate by the CIA. Just ask JFK and his brother Bobby. Let's not forget the FBI, Oklahoma City, Israeli Mossad, as they compartmentalize. USS in the CIA, where killing's okay. They love to assassinate. So many can relate.
MLK.
The CIA, they collect their pay. They do their dirty deeds. And do we really need the CIA?
I think you know the answer to that one.
The CIA.
What a happy and snappy song.
When in doubt, they'll take you out. When in doubt, they'll take you out. Don't you just love these guys? Oh yeah.
I must tell you, that song, what makes that song, in my mind, was Tim Catching played the piano parts on that. And that piano just took the song to another level. But if, in case people don't know, Manuel Noriega, Saddam Hussein were both created. They were made CIA operatives in 1959, the same year. And if you don't know, Osama bin Laden's name in the CIA was Tim Osman, who died in December of 2001. He was a CIA operative for a long, long time. And in fact, he was seen in July of 2001 being treated at I think it was a CIA hospital for his dialysis. And he died in 2001. And most of the world knew that, except our country, until our President Obama said they went over and killed him, shot him, threw him out to sea, and then all those Navy SEALs were killed. So there's a lot of stuff going on with the CIA, and if you think you can trust these people, come on, man. They lie all the time. And now we got the COVID-19, as Dave said earlier. This is a 100% hoax. I mean, you shouldn't wear a mask. A mask will make you sick. It's more hazardous to your health than the coronavirus. Virus is not contagious or airborne. And now back to Dave. You had a break there with a little happy and snappy song about the CIA, huh?
I love that song. Yeah, that's one of your best. The Liberty story also has a CIA connection, in the sense that the United States, as I mentioned before, actually I didn't really elaborate on it, but the United States was not at the time, and they're not now, allies of Israel, because there is no mutual defense pact or treaty between the countries. So they're not allies in the strict sense. So their connection began with the CIA and the Mossad, and they were the United States was pretty much depending on Israel for the spying in that part of the world, because they just didn't have the personnel there in place. And on top of it, primarily, because there were so many Jews in the Soviet Union, and because the Jews were the ones who created communism, and they had a lot of connections there, and there were still Jews in the Soviet Union who were spying on the Soviet Union for Israel, and there still are now. And just as there are Jews in the United States, American Jews spying on our country for Israel, the same was the case in '67 with Egypt.
Yeah.
There were Egyptian Jews then and now who swear their allegiance to Israel and not their host countries. So this is one of the reasons that Israel was able to gain the advantage in the war, was because they had some spies there who had befriended the upper echelons of the Egyptian armed forces. As a matter of fact, there's a Netflix, I guess, a movie or a series now about one of them, Levy, I think his name was, who they caught, and they hung in Damascus. So they caught him in Egypt, they hung him in Damascus. So Israel has a long history of using Jews in certain host countries to spy on the host country for Israel, like the Jonathan Pollard and like all the other ones that they've caught here.
And then in our country, we have dual citizens in our Democratic and Republican parties, and I don't think we should have dual citizens in our government because their allegiance is to Israel, not to us. So I have a big problem with that.
It's a problem. It's a big problem. And, something has to be done. Whether or not it's going to be done, I don't know. But something definitely has to be done because you can't swear allegiance to, if you're an American, to a country other than this country. But the problem is that, and I've said this many times, is that if you take a look at the 100% of the money that Democrat politicians get in their campaign coffers. So 100%, if this circle represents 100% of all the money they get from all sources, about 75% of that circle comes from Jews and Jewish groups.
Right.
And they even admit that. So you're talking 2% of the population, a tiny percent of that who are, let's say, politically active in the Democrat Party. That small of a percentage of people in this country are contributing that much to Democratic campaign coffers, campaign war chests, and about 40% of Republicans' total campaign contributions come from Jews and Jewish groups. That's huge.
Yeah, both parties they all go and they hump the wall over there, and all of Trump's surroundings. I mean, look at his kids are all married to them,
yes.
and that's the thing about Jaron, who's the husband of what's his name? Ivanka. He's got Jared Kushner. He's got the 666 building in New York, and you can't everything that if you ever research the involvement with the JFK assassination and 9/11, and you can't I'm kind of reluctant to say it here. What I said in my opening song, they like to censor everything we do, and they're the only ones you can never question. You can never question them.
That's right.
Let's see. Blood libel. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah.
Oh, definition.
Yeah,
Somebody wrote an accusation that Jewish people use the blood of Christians in religious rituals, especially in the preparation of Passover bread. There's so many things that you can go in what they believe and what they do. Synagogue of Satan is what you call them many times, and we have Satanists in every aspect of our life, controlling Hollywood, all the owners of all the sport teams, the people in charge of all sports except sort of NFL. But at the end of the day, he says they own what we're talking on here, YouTube. They own fake book is what I call it. Every aspect, the Federal Reserve, which is not federal or reserve, and they're in control. And the opening of my song, "Who Owns Us?" Who owns us? Who can censor what I sing? Well, guess what? All my 12 CDs are gone because of that one song. They were taken down.
Yes.
Tell the truth about them. You have to be so brave. That's the second verse. So. Are we going to be cut right now?
We might.
Get back to what you were talking about before they cut us off.
Well, as far as blood libel goes, that is part of the Liberty story, and I'll read this to you.
Okay.
when they were in the process of covering it up, and of course, I explained some of the reasons why it was covered up, and I also talked about the American Jews who have more allegiance to Israel. Well, really, what kicked off the cover-up were American Jewish congressmen and senators, representatives and senators, who, even before they heard anything other than the fact that the Liberty was attacked by Israel, they went to the floor of each chamber making excuses for Israel. Oh, poor little Israel, they would never do it, the fog of war, blah, blah, blah. So they took the side of Israel, of course, before the side of their own country, which really is just a host country for a lot of them, because their allegiance, as we said, is to another country, to Israel. So when they were when they were in the process of covering up what happened, it says here that Israeli diplomats manipulated the media to downplay or kill stories about the attack, and even silenced an angry President Lyndon Johnson by threatening to publicly accuse him of blood libel or anti-Semitism. So, yes, they will use whatever is in their arsenal to shut you up. And really, if you look at this matter, which I do, not the Liberty, but I mean in general, these people, if you look at the damage that they're doing here to free speech, they are the biggest threat to the First Amendment in this country at this time. So if people respect or want to keep their the ability of them to say what they want, they better get knowledgeable about this group of people.
Well, Michael Jones, they created hate speech. They created the term hate speech. And and in 2012, the Smith Modernization Act, which was from somebody corrected me. I guess it came earlier, but it overturned the propaganda to be legal then, and that's what they wanted. If you see what's going on in this COVID-19, they made it so everything the media can tell us now, which they own the media. Every station they own, they can do propaganda now. It's legal. And that's what's going on. And that's why I call it fake. It's a fake pandemic, and we have a fake election. I mean, it's already determined who's going to win. People have to realize that. That's just what's going on. That's been going on forever.
Well, who do you think is going to win?
Well, I don't even bother to say because it's already determined. I will say this. I think Trump's going to win for the simple reason there's been a lot of predictive programming about him being the last president. And if you look at, I think it was tarot cards or a lot of the media, the Apprentice show he had, Back to the Future. There's so many references to him before this. And so to think that Trump's the president by accident, no, it's not. There's no accident to any of them. But I always say about the best way to look at elections, Bush beat Gore 5-4. That's a song right there. Bush beat Gore 5-4. That's all you got to know about elections. And we went along with that. That was okay. Okay, let's move on. Bush is the president. I mean, there's no way that we should have really gone along with that. But we do. The people do because, let's go. Now people are going along with wearing masks because they want. I've heard so many people wearing masks. Well, we might as well just do it because, then it'll end. Well, then the vaccine comes. You want to get a vaccine? Come on. The only way we stop this is the people. We have to. That's the last song I'm going to play through today is Push Back. We, the people, have to push back. That's the only way this COVID-19 ends because if we don't push back, it's not going to end. And it's worldwide. That's right. I have a good friend in Australia that tells me a lot of people want to leave Australia now, but they won't let them. They can't travel. Yeah.
Yeah, that Victoria, it's problematic there.
And that.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know, John. All I know is that, really what has to be done is people need to spend more time reading and less time talking.
You know what I do on election day? I stay home. You can't blame me for this shit. Yeah, that's me doing a George Carlin. Here's a book that I recommend, Balfour's Shadow, to find out more about the Balfour letter that had no legal and I mean, a letter can't make it. It's just a letter he wrote to, as I said in the intro, to Walter Rothschild. And another great book, our good friend, your good friend. How long did you know Victor Thorne, by the way?
Before he ostensibly killed himself?
Yeah.
About 6 years.
Well, this book, did you ever read New World Order Assassins?
Yeah, we did an interview on it too, but they've taken a lot of them off. Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
Well, go on.
I did a lot of interviews. Every time Victor had a new book out, I did interviews with him. So, but yeah, they're cleansing, they're purging.
Right.
So they took a lot of that stuff off.
Well, he has a great chapter about the Port Arthur massacre in Australia that eventually everyone turned in their guns. And the guy who did it, 28-year-old Martin Bryant, allegedly did it, had, here we go, a 66 IQ. Now, there you go. There's a 6 again. And again, there's no trial for this guy. He was sentenced to 1,035 years in maximum security. But my friend in Australia says, yeah, the people in Australia are a little mad right now that they're handing in all their guns. We should all know this. But,
they knew what they were doing.
But to say this guy did all the shooting is ridiculous. He 35 did it, 20-some. He did it that fast, and then they found him in the parking lot, and then they convince him that he does it, which is what the Manchurian Candidate kind of thing is. And then there's no trial. There's no trial for Oswald, Osama bin Laden. The bottom line is everybody believes our government stories. I mean, you can pick all of them apart, every one of them.
It's, it's a problem. The problem really, I mean, it's not the bad guys. It's your next door neighbor. And your next door neighbor doesn't know anything. And that's the problem. And because they don't know anything, look, here's the thing. Especially now, it's going to get really bad here in this country after the election. With evictions, with mental health, with the election, with the riots that are going to be coming, because I think Trump is going to get in, and I think that the left is going to do what they do. So the bad news is that there's a lot of suffering going on now, and it's going to get a lot worse. With the people getting evicted, with no jobs, with no prospect, with them playing this stupid scamdemic farce as long as they can, we're in for some tough times. And we're talking, people not having food on the table. Just recently, there were the lines, thousands of cars long, lining up for food.
Right.
Because there's no jobs, because of what they did. What they did for a flu that 99.99% of folks recover from.
Yeah, and 0.002 I have it. I mean, it's the first of it ever. And the thing that gets me is that they're encouraging people to turn in people who aren't wearing a mask.
Yes.
And this is the thing that's what makes me, they call them Karens or whatever. I've had that happen to me so often. And that's the wrong thing. You should not trust the government. They think they're doing a good deed by turning somebody in. No, you're doing what they want, and you shouldn't do it. And
well, that's what I was saying. These are really the enemy, not the government. The government's going to be the government, but if the citizenry was educated, the government would not be allowed to get away with what it's getting away with. And I think the term Karen is used for, it's a disparaging term for white women who somehow call the police on black people for things that they shouldn't be calling the police on them for.
Well, that's
like walking their dog or something.
Yeah, see, that's where we are, and I don't know how much more you want to talk about today, Dave. I know you've got a lot you're doing, but I really, for me, it's a pleasure to have you on my show here, and I think you really, to me, also shed more light on the USS Liberty than anybody else could have, and telling more about it that I didn't know. And again, what you're telling us is like new information here and I think we now know why the cover up. I wanted to compare it to the Pat Tillman story, in the sense that did you ever see the movie made on Tillman?
I'm not a movie guy.
Well, they made the family, and bottom line is Pat Tillman saw the guys before they shot him. He said, "Hey, I'm effing Pat Tillman." They shot him 3 times in the head, and his body hits the ground. They took the cover-up started immediately. The USS Liberty is shot up. The cover-up starts immediately. Our government is famous for doing these things. About Pat Tillman in the story, a congressman came up to his dad and said, "I want to thank you for your son's service," and the dad rightfully said, "Get your effing hand out of my effing face." And I wish Tillman's dad would have jumped all over Rumsfeld. They all knew what was going on. They knew everything Tillman was doing. But Tillman turned against the invasion against Iraq because he was guarding the poppy fields in Afghanistan. And he said, "This is wrong." And I wish he had talked to me, because I would have said, "Hey, man, this 9/11 stuff, you're not... this is the thing. If you're awake as long as I have since the 80s, well, you wake up on the COVID first day. I knew this was BS. But
yes.
Trying to wake people up is tough, but thanks for coming on my show. I hope everybody who listens, I'm going to spread the word more, and I'm going to buy more of your books to hand out, because I need more. I handed out 20 already. But we're going to end the show today with my song "Push Back," because I thought this was the appropriate song. We the people have to push back, and more so now than ever on this COVID-19. So thank you, Dave, for coming on the show, man.
Well, thank you, John. You're doing great work, and your show looks terrific. It really does. You look great. It's great to see you. I love your hat. Really. No, you're really good at this. I must say, you're a natural at it, and if there's any way that I could, help you get to more people, just let me know. I think you're a very pleasant host and a very knowledgeable guy, and I'm happy to be here.
Well, the feeling's mutual. We have a mutual admiration society going right now, and I'll help you, you help me, like Tom Cruise said in the "Help me, help you, help me, help me," or some stupid thing like that. Anyway, we're going to hear "Push Back," everyone. I hope you enjoyed the show. Spread the word for people to watch this so they can learn more about the USS Liberty. Thanks for coming. Thanks. Press the like button and subscribe. Have a good day, man.
Living in a world ruled by psychopaths, starting their wars that fuel their bloodbaths. I hope you know they don't us. I hope you know they don't deserve our trust. Our lives would be enjoyed if not for them, and we should never stop from learning how the world works. Learning who's in charge. It's time to push back and let them know they're no longer in control. It's time to push back, take control. Come on everybody, let's let them know. Living in a world ruled by liars and thieves. All they do is steal and give you false beliefs. What would it take to open your eyes? Since all official stories are full of lies. Our lives would be enjoyed if not for them. And we should never stop from learning, learning, learning how the world works. Learning, learning, learning who's in charge. Learning, learning, learning how to change things. Learning, learning, learning that we're in charge. It's time to push back and let them know they're no longer in control. It's time to push back, take control now. Come on everybody, let's let them know. It's time to push back, push, let them know. Let them know. We are now in control.
Rothschilds, Rockefellers, you know any others? Learning, learning, let's end the Fed before we're all dead. Learning, learning, all the wars are for the rich. We don't have to fight them anymore. Thanks for everyone coming to show. We're going to have a new one next week, so stay tuned. Push back. And push back, everyone. Push back. We got to end this COVID-19 now, right? Have a good night. Bye-bye.